The cake sat untouched, its candles burned to stubs, wax dripping like tears onto the chocolate frosting. Jaden Carter, 18, stood frozen in the dining room of his family's modest Atlanta home. The weight of his words still hanging in the air. I'm gay. His parents' faces, once warm with birthday cheer, had twisted into something unrecognizable, their silence louder than any scream. Jaden's heart pounded as he replayed the moment in his mind. He'd planned this for months, practicing in front of his mirror, whispering the truth to his reflection until it felt less like a confession and more like a declaration. He was ready, or so he thought. Atlanta's humid summer air clung to his skin as he stood in the dining room. His younger sister, Mia, staring wide-eyed from her seat, her fork suspended mid-bite. His mother, Evelyn, clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles paling, while his father, Marcus, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his jaw tight as steel. "Say that again," Marcus finally growled, his voice low, dangerous. Jaden swallowed, his throat dry. "I'm gay, Dad. I've known for years. I didn't want to hide anymore." Evelyn's gasp cut through the room like a blade. No, you're confused, Jaden. You're too young to know something like that." Her voice trembled, but there was an edge to it, a plea wrapped in denial. "I'm not confused," Jaden said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "This is who I am." Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Not in this house, it's not." His words were a verdict, final and unyielding. Jaden's chest tightened, but he held his ground, meeting his father's gaze. He'd expected resistance, maybe even anger, but not this. Not the way Marcus's eyes burned with something close to betrayal. Mia, only 14, broke the silence. "Jaden, what's happening?" Her voice was small, scared, and it nearly broke him. He wanted to reach for her, to explain, but before he could, Evelyn spoke again, her voice cracking. "You're not our son," she said, the words tumbling out like they'd been locked away too long. "You're adopted, Jaden. We took you in, raised you, gave you everything, and this is how you repay us." The room spun. Adopted? The word hit like a freight train, stealing his breath. Jaden's knees buckled, and he gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. What are you talking about?" he stammered, searching their faces for a lie, a mistake, anything but the truth. Marcus's voice was cold, final. "You heard her. We're not your real parents, and we don't have to deal with this choice of yours." He pointed to the door. "Get out." Jaden's world shattered in that moment, the pieces scattering across the dining room floor. He stumbled toward the door, his backpack slung over one shoulder, the weight of their rejection heavier than anything he'd ever carried. The door slammed behind him, the sound echoing in his ears as he stood on the porch, the humid night swallowing him whole. Jaden wandered the streets of Atlanta, the city's pulse a stark contrast to the chaos in his mind. Neon signs flickered above bars and restaurants, and the distant hum of traffic mixed with the chatter of strangers. He had nowhere to go. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Mia, texting him, "Are you okay? Please come back." His heart ached, but he couldn't face her, not yet. Not when he didn't even know who he was anymore. He found himself at a small park near downtown, the kind of place where kids played during the day and couples strolled at night. Sitting on a bench, he stared at the stars, trying to piece together the fragments of his life. Adopted. The word felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else's story. He'd always felt different, his darker skin compared to his parents' lighter tones, the way he never quite fit into their rigid expectations. but he chalked it up to being a teenager, to being himself. Now, it all made a terrible kind of sense. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice. "You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders." Jaden looked up to see a young man standing a few feet away, his curly hair catching the glow of a nearby street lamp. He was about Jaden's age, maybe 18 or 19, with warm brown eyes and a tentative smile. His name, Jaden would later learn, was Mateo Rivera. "I'm fine," Jaden muttered, though his voice betrayed him. Mateo tilted his head, unconvinced. "Mind if I sit?" He didn't wait for an answer, settling onto the bench with an easy grace. "I'm Mateo, and you look like you need to talk." Jaden hesitated. He wasn't used to opening up, especially not to strangers. But something about Mateo's quiet confidence, the way he didn't push, made Jaden's walls crumble just a little. "It's been a rough night," he admitted. Mateo nodded, as if he understood more than Jaden was saying. "Want to tell me about it?" And so, under the Atlanta sky, Jaden poured out his story, the birthday, the coming out, the adoption bombshell, the door slamming shut. Mateo listened, his eyes never leaving Jaden's, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm. When Jaden finished, his voice hoarse, Mateo reached out, his hand brushing Jaden's arm. "That's a lot," Mateo said softly. "But you're still here. That's something." Jaden managed a small smile, the first in hours. "Yeah, I guess." Mateo grinned, his eyes crinkling. "Come on, let's get you some coffee or something. You can't solve the world's problems on an empty stomach." They walked to a nearby diner, the kind with sticky tables and waitresses who called you sugar. Over cheap coffee and greasy fries, Jaden learned that Mateo was a freshman at Emory University, studying art history, and had moved to Atlanta from New Orleans. He was openly gay, raised by a single mom who'd embraced him fully when he came out at 16. His easy confidence was magnetic, and Jaden found himself drawn to him. As the night wore on, Jaden felt something shift inside him. A spark of hope, fragile but real. Mateo's laughter, the way he leaned in when he talked, the way he didn't flinch when their hands brushed. It was the first time Jaden felt seen, truly seen, in years. But the weight of his parents' rejection lingered, a shadow he couldn't shake. And when Mateo offered to let Jaden crash at his dorm for the night, Jaden hesitated. Trust was hard to come by, especially now. But Mateo's eyes were kind, and Jaden was tired, so tired of running. "Okay," Jaden said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just for tonight." Mateo's smile was like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Just for tonight," he echoed. As they walked toward Emory's campus, Jaden felt the first stirrings of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. Mateo's dorm was a small, cluttered space filled with art books, half-finished sketches, and a single bed pushed against a window overlooking Atlanta's skyline. Jaden stood awkwardly in the doorway, his backpack still slung over his shoulder, as Mateo tossed him a spare blanket. "It's not much, but it's home," Mateo said, his voice warm. "You can take the bed. I'll crash on the floor." Jaden shook his head. "No way. I'm not kicking you out of your own bed." Mateo raised an eyebrow, a playful smirk tugging at his lips. "Stubborn, huh? Fine, we'll share. It's a twin, but we'll make it work." Jaden's face heated, and he looked away, suddenly hyper-aware of Mateo's presence. The way his curls fell into his eyes, the way his voice carried a hint of a New Orleans drawl. They settled onto the bed, lying side by side, the space between them electric with unspoken tension. Jaden stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. He was in a stranger's dorm, his life appended, Yet somehow, this felt like the safest place he'd been in years. "Tell me something about you," Mateo said, breaking the silence. "Something nobody else knows." Jaden hesitated, then spoke softly. "I used to write poetry. Stupid stuff, mostly. About stars and dreams and feeling like I didn't belong." He laughed, self-conscious. "I stopped when I realized no one would ever read it." Mateo turned to face him, his eyes soft in the dim light. "I'd read it." Jaden's breath caught. He wasn't used to this. Someone looking at him like he was worth seeing. "Your turn," he said, deflecting. Mateo grinned. "I'm terrified of heights, like paralyzing fear. But I climbed a water tower once, back in New Orleans, just to prove I could." He paused, his voice dropping. "I threw up afterward, but it was worth it." Jaden laughed, the sound surprising him. For a moment, the weight of the day lifted, and it was just them. Two boys sharing secrets in the dark. The next morning, Jaden woke to the smell of coffee and the sight of Mateo sketching at his desk. "Morning, poet," Mateo said, not looking up. "Coffee's on the table. We've got a big day." "A big day?" Jaden asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Mateo's grin was mischievous. "You're in Atlanta, man. You can't just sit around feeling sorry for yourself. I'm taking you to the High Museum. Art heals, you know." Jaden wanted to protest. He wasn't ready to face the world, but Mateo's enthusiasm was infectious. They spent the day wandering the museum's galleries, Mateo pointing out his favorite pieces with a passion that made Jaden's chest ache. There was something about Mateo's unguarded joy, the way he saw beauty in everything, that made Jaden want to be braver, too. But reality crept back in. Jaden's phone buzzed with another text from Mia. "Mom and Dad are fighting. They won't talk about you." The words stung, a reminder of the life he'd lost. He shoved his phone into his pocket, but Mateo noticed. "You okay?" Mateo asked, his voice gentle. Jaden shook his head. "I don't know who I am anymore. They said I'm adopted, but they didn't tell me anything else. What if I don't belong anywhere?" Mateo stopped walking, turning to face him. "You belong where you choose to be, Jaden, not where someone else decides." The words hit hard, and Jaden felt tears prick his eyes. He blinked them away, embarrassed, but Mateo didn't look away. Instead, he reached out, his fingers brushing Jaden's hand. The touch was fleeting, but it sent a jolt through Jaden's body, a mix of fear and longing he couldn't name. That night, back in Mateo's dorm, Jaden couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about his parents. Evelyn's tears, Marcus's anger, the door slamming shut. And he thought about Mateo, who'd given him a place to stay, a reason to smile. When Mateo's hand found his in the dark, Jaden didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined, and for the first time in days, Jaden felt like he could breathe. But the peace was short-lived. The next morning, Jaden's phone rang. A number he didn't recognize. He answered, his heart racing, and a woman's voice came through, calm but urgent. "Is this Jaden Carter? My name's Dr. Lena Torres. I'm a social worker. Your parents contacted me about your situation." Jaden's stomach dropped. "What situation?" Dr. Torres hesitated. "They're considering legal emancipation. They want to sever ties completely. But there's something else about your adoption. Can we meet?" Jaden's world tilted again. Emancipation? Sever ties? He glanced at Mateo, who was watching him with concern, and forced his voice to stay steady. "Yeah, okay. Where?" As he hung up, Mateo was already by his side. "What's going on?" Jaden shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. I think I'm about to lose everything. Again. Dr. Lena Torres's office was tucked into a quiet corner of Midtown Atlanta, a small space filled with plants and soft lighting that did little to ease Jaden's nerves. He sat across from her, Mateo beside him for support, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Dr. Torres, a middle-aged woman with warm eyes and a gentle demeanor, slid a folder across her desk. Jaden, I know this is a lot to process, she said, but I need you to understand what's happening. Jaden's throat tightened. Just tell me. She opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents. Your parents, Evelyn and Marcus, adopted you when you were 6 months old through a private agency. They never told you because they wanted you to feel like their biological son. But after what happened on your birthday, they contacted me to discuss emancipation. Emancipation? Jaden's voice cracked. They want to legally disown me? Dr. Torres's expression softened. It's not that simple. They're struggling, Jaden. You're coming out and their reaction, it's brought up a lot of unresolved issues. But there's more. Your birth mother, she's been trying to find you. Jaden's heart stopped. My birth mother? The words felt unreal, like they belonged to someone else's life. Who is she? Why now? Dr. Torres slid a photo across the desk. A woman in her late 30s, with skin like Jaden's and a smile that felt achingly familiar. Her name is Aisha Bennett. She was 16 when she had you. She wasn't ready to raise a child, so she gave you up, but she's never stopped thinking about you. She's in Savannah now, and she wants to meet you. Jaden stared at the photo, his mind reeling. A mother, a real mother out there somewhere who might want him. But the thought was overshadowed by the sting of his adoptive parents' rejection. Why didn't they tell me? He whispered. All these years they lied to me. Mateo's hand found his under the table, a quiet anchor. You don't have to figure this out alone, he said softly. Dr. Torres nodded. You have options, Jaden. You can meet Aisha or you can take time to process this. As for your parents, they're not ready to reconcile, but I'm here to help you navigate this. Legally, emotionally, whatever you need. Jaden left the office in a daze, the photo of Aisha clutched in his hand. Mateo stayed close, his presence a steady comfort as they walked through Atlanta's bustling streets. What do you want to do? Mateo asked, his voice gentle but firm. I don't know, Jaden admitted. I want to meet her, but what if she rejects me too? What if I'm not enough for her either? Mateo stopped, turning to face him. Jaden, you are enough. You've always been enough. Anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve you. The words hit like a lifeline, and Jaden felt his walls crumble. Without thinking, he stepped closer, his hand brushing Mateo's cheek. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, the world fell away. Mateo leaned in, and their lips met, a soft, tentative kiss that felt like a promise. Jaden's heart raced, not with fear, but with something new, hope. But hope was fragile, and reality was relentless. That night, Jaden got a text from Mia. Dad's throwing out your stuff. I saved what I could. I'm sorry. The words were a punch to the gut, and Jaden's vision blurred with tears. Mateo pulled him into a hug, holding him as he cried, the weight of his loss too heavy to bear alone. The next day, Jaden made a decision. I'm going to Savannah, he told Mateo. I need to know who I am, who she is. Mateo didn't hesitate. I'm coming with you. The train to Savannah was a quiet one, the hum of the tracks a steady backdrop to Jaden's racing thoughts. Mateo sat beside him, sketching in a notebook, his presence a quiet reassurance. As the Georgia countryside rolled by, Jaden thought about Aisha, her smile, her story, the life she'd lived without him. He wondered if she'd accept him, if she'd see the real him, the boy who loved poetry and boys and dreamed of a world where he could just be. Savannah greeted them with cobblestone streets and the salty tang of the ocean. Aisha had agreed to meet at a small cafe near the riverfront, and as Jaden walked toward it, his heart pounded so loudly he thought it might burst. Mateo squeezed his hand. "You've got this," he said. Inside the cafe, Jaden saw her immediately. Aisha, sitting by a window, her hands wrapped around a mug. She looked up, and their eyes met, and Jaden felt a jolt of recognition, like seeing a piece of himself for the first time. She stood, her smile trembling, and opened her arms. "Jaden," she whispered, and he was in her embrace before he could think, her warmth washing away years of doubt. They talked for hours, her story spilling out. She'd been a scared teenager, pressured to give him up, but she'd never stopped loving him. She was proud of him, she said, for being brave enough to live his truth. As the sun set over the Savannah River, Jaden felt something shift inside him. A sense of belonging, fragile but real. But the shadow of his adoptive parents' rejection still loomed, and he knew this was only the beginning. Back in Atlanta, Jaden and Mateo settled into a fragile rhythm. Jaden was staying with Mateo temporarily, but the uncertainty of his future gnawed at him. Aisha had offered him a place to stay in Savannah, but Jaden wasn't ready to leave Atlanta. Not yet, not when Mateo was here, not when he still had questions about his past. Dr. Torres arranged a meeting with Evelyn and Marcus, hoping to mediate, but Jaden wasn't optimistic. The thought of facing them again made his stomach churn, but he needed answers. Why had they hidden his adoption? Why had they reacted so brutally to his truth? The meeting was tense, held in a neutral conference room at Dr. Torres's office. Evelyn sat with her hands clasped, her eyes red-rimmed, while Marcus stared at the wall, his jaw tight. Jaden sat across from them, Mateo by his side, his presence a quiet strength. "I just want to understand," Jaden said, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. "Why didn't you tell me I was adopted? Why did you throw me out?" Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. "We wanted to protect you, Jaden. We thought if you didn't know, you'd feel like you belonged." "Belonged?" Jaden's voice rose. "You made me feel like I was nothing. You lied to me my whole life, and when I told you who I am, you slammed the door in my face." Marcus finally spoke, his voice gruff. "We raised you right. We gave you everything, and you chose this." Jaden's hands clenched into fists. "It's not a choice, Dad. It's who I am. And if you can't accept that, maybe you're the ones who don't belong in my life." The words hung heavy, and Evelyn's sob broke the silence. Dr. Torres stepped in, her voice calm but firm. "This is a lot for everyone. Jaden, your parents are struggling with their own beliefs. It doesn't excuse their actions, but it's part of why they reacted the way they did." Jaden shook his head, tears stinging his eyes. "I needed you to love me, not to fix me." Mateo's hand found his under the table, a silent reminder that he wasn't alone. The meeting ended with no resolution, just a promise to keep talking. But Jaden felt a shift. He wasn't begging for their approval anymore. He was choosing himself. Back at Mateo's dorm, Jaden's emotions spilled over. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I'm trying to be strong, but it hurts so much." Mateo pulled him close, his arms steady. "You don't have to be strong all the time, Jaden. You're allowed to hurt, but you're also allowed to heal." Their lips met again, this time with a quiet intensity that felt like a vow. Jaden let himself sink into it, into Mateo, into the possibility of a future where he could be whole. But even as they held each other, Jaden knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. His parents' rejection, his adoption, Aisha's reappearance. It was all a tangled mess, and he was still finding his way through. The next week, Jaden started working part-time at a local bookstore, a job Mateo helped him find. It was a small step, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of himself. He spent his evenings with Mateo, exploring Atlanta's queer community. Drag shows, poetry slams, quiet nights at safe spaces like Outfront Theater. Each moment with Mateo felt like a brushstroke on a canvas, painting a life Jaden hadn't dared to dream of. But the past wasn't done with him. One night, Mia showed up at the bookstore, her eyes red from crying. "They're selling the house," she said, her voice trembling. "They're moving to Florida. They don't want me to see you anymore." Jaden's heart broke for her, for the sister he'd always protected. He pulled her into a hug, promising to stay in her life no matter what. But as she left, he felt the weight of his family's unraveling settle deeper into his bones. That night, Mateo took him to a rooftop overlooking the city, the skyline glittering under a blanket of stars. "You're not alone, Jaden," Mateo said, his voice fierce. "You have Mia. You have Aisha. You have me." Jaden looked at him, his heart full and aching. "What if I mess this up? What if I'm not enough for you?" Mateo's smile was soft, certain. "You're more than enough, and I'm not going anywhere." As they stood together, the city sprawling below them, Jaden felt a flicker of something new, a strength he hadn't known he had. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was building a life one moment at a time. Months passed, and Jaden's life began to take shape. He moved into a small apartment with Aisha's help, a cozy space in Decatur where he could start fresh. Aisha visited often, their bond growing stronger with each conversation. She shared stories of her life, her struggles, her triumphs, her love for Jaden that had never faded. Jaden started writing poetry again, his words spilling onto the page like a map of his heart. Mateo was a constant, his presence a steady light in Jaden's world. They went on dates, picnics in Piedmont Park, late-night drives to the outskirts of the city, quiet moments where they could just be. Their relationship wasn't perfect. Jaden's insecurities sometimes flared, and Mateo's optimism could feel overwhelming. But they talked through it, fought through it, loved through it. Jaden kept in touch with Mia, sneaking visits when their parents weren't around. She was growing up fast, her own rebellion simmering under the surface. Jaden promised her a place to stay when she turned 18, a promise he intended to keep. He couldn't save her yet, but he could be there, the way Mateo had been for him. One day, Dr. Torres called with news. Evelyn and Marcus had agreed to family therapy. Jaden was skeptical, but he agreed to try, for Mia's sake if nothing else. The sessions were raw, painful, filled with tears and accusations. Evelyn admitted her fear of losing Jaden had driven her to silence about his adoption, while Marcus struggled to reconcile his faith with Jaden's truth. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a start. On Jaden's 19th birthday, he stood on the same wooden bridge in New Orleans where he and Mateo had shared their first real moment. They'd driven down for the weekend, a trip to celebrate not just his birthday, but his survival. The bayou stretched out before them, Spanish moss swaying in the breeze, the air thick with the scent of magnolias. Mateo handed him a small notebook, its cover worn but beautiful. "For your poetry," he said, his eyes bright. "I want the world to hear your voice." Jaden opened it, finding a single line in Mateo's handwriting. You are enough. Tears welled in his eyes, but they were different this time. Tears of gratitude, of love, of a future he could finally see. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Jaden took Mateo's hand. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady, "for seeing me, for staying." Mateo's smile was radiant. Always. They kissed on the bridge, the world falling away, leaving only them and the promise of tomorrow. Jaden's journey wasn't over. There were still wounds to heal, questions to answer, a family to rebuild or let go. But for the first time, he knew he could face it. He'd come out, he'd been broken, and he'd found himself again. Not in the shadow of his parents' rejection, but in the light of his own truth. The stars emerged above them, a canvas of endless possibilities. Jaden looked at Mateo, at the life they were building, and felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. He was enough, and that was everything.